Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back, everyone. Our speaker today is Bill Weber, a senior Vipassana practitioner and a graduate of the Spirit Rock Community Dharma Leaders Program. 25 years of extensive retreat practice, and now practices at home with his husband and with small groups of gay men. Also, he is a documentary filmmaker and video editor whose work has an incredible importance to preserving the culture and history of specifically queer people. Films like The Coquettes, the Be Takei, and the Untold Tales of Armistead, Maupin. I have to say this work will last for generations in inspiring young gay people to know about this rich community and culture that they're a part of. So thank you for that, and welcome to back to GBF, Bill.
Thank you. It's nice to be back, and it's nice to see everybody again. I look forward to the days when we can do this in person again, too, and I imagine that's probably coming up fairly soon. I hope. One thing I really enjoy about being able to talk to this group is that for the couple of months beforehand, when I'm thinking about what I want to talk about and what I want to share, that I get to invite some topic of the Dharma into my life and really examine it and really play with it a bit and really sort of see how it plays true for me. So one thing that has been coming up for me lately is the topic of humility. And so I thought, I don't think I've ever heard a Dharma talk on humility before, but I thought that would be could be something interesting to explore. And it was also something that has been really interesting for me to play with in these last couple of months. How does humility play in my life? When can it be helpful, and how is it helpful, and what is the effect of just sort of connecting with my own humility, my own sense of not being so self-centered and being more concerned with the well-being of others and being more connected with the life that's around me. And again, not being so self-centered. And it's something that I, in general have a tendency to do sometimes. The Buddha said, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. And so it's the topic that I've been sitting with and that I've been thinking about. It's nice to have humility be the thought that's occupying my mind, and how that leads me forward. Because oftentimes I find that my mind is resting in places or consumed with thoughts that aren't so helpful. It can be anger, it can be fear, it can be uncertainty, especially in these uncertain times. And if I'm constantly in that mind state, that's sort of where I exist. But if I start to bring in a little bit of humility and a little bit of concern for others, it opens up and it changes things in some way or another. humility sort of came up for me from, I'm currently working on a movie about Leonard Cohen and the song Hallelujah and his writing of the song Hallelujah. And we're finishing that up now. But one thing and I've been working on this with some friends of mine for, well over a year, all through the pandemic. And one thing that's come up for me in working with Leonard is he's a very humble person. For somebody that was as prolific as he was, for somebody that wrote a song like Hallelujah that I'm sure all of you know, that everybody around the world knows, it seems like. I think it's the most streamed song in history right now. And he's very humble about it. And there's one quote of him, and I heard this in many interviews, of this one interview that we're using in the film. And here's what he talked about his songwriting process and about writing Hallelujah. And he said, it was a gift. Of course, you keep your tools sharp and you keep your skill in the condition of operation. But the real song, where that comes from, no one knows. That is grace. That is a gift. And that is not yours. If I knew where songs came from, I would go there more often. That really touched me. It's such a humble attitude to a gift that he has. And he acknowledges that, you have to keep your tools sharp. You have to keep up on your craft, but then you also have to be open to what comes to you and accept it with grace and humility. I certainly noticed that in some of the work I've done before. And some of the editing I'm probably the most proud of, it didn't come out of my mind in a way. It just came from a sense of play and a sense of exploration. And then it's just sort of there. And I've often attributed that to not being mine. It's to the gift of what is present in front of me. So in thinking about Leonard's humility, I also thought about the humility of others that I've been inspired by. And usually when I think of people that I've been inspired by, the Dalai Lama comes up often because I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to see the Dalai Lama live, but he's not full of himself. For somebody that is a world-renowned religious leader, he's a very simple man, and he calls himself a simple monk. He says, I always consider myself as a simple monk. I feel that is the real me. I feel that the Dalai Lama is a temporal ruler in a man-made institution and is a man-made institution. So he sort of sees that role as something that is temporary, something that's man-made, and something that it's a part that he plays, but that the real humble Dalai Lama is a simple monk. Also, when thinking about humility, I think about the lack of humility sometimes. And I think we all just went through an American experience of 4 years of being governed by the least humble person I think I've ever experienced. Somebody who shows absolutely no humility whatsoever, who puts his name on everything that he touches. And it's me, me, me. One of my favorite drag names, me, me, me. That's what the lack of humility looks like. That's what it feels like. And we all know that so well right now, having gone through that. I think it's been empowering this sense of American exceptionalism that is also an arrogant attitude. It's that we are better than others and that we will, go on street corners and hold up signs and protest in that we are something special. This lack of humility, and it's not pretty. And I've sensed that in myself before. I've known that in myself, and that's something that I want to work with and something that I want to steer myself away from. It's also coming back to what the Buddha says. We are what we think. We are where our mind rests. And with that in mind, we can also, bringing back in that humbleness, we can counteract that to some degree. Humility comes from the Latin word humilitar, which comes from, it can translate, the Latin humilis means grounded, means from the earth. And I really like that humility is ground. Humility is earth. Because to me, the ground, the earth, it embodies strength. It embodies some kind of stability. There's something universal about it. But it's that groundedness that I really found myself being attracted to. In the West, and traditionally, we often look at humility as something that's not necessarily a positive trait. The dictionary defines humility as a low self-regard and a sense of unworthiness, which sometimes I wonder if that definition of humility can actually play into our hesitancy to invite humility into our lives more. When we humiliate somebody, we try to make them ashamed. We try to make them feel foolish to humiliate somebody. I don't know about you, but I like to watch RuPaul sometimes, and there's a section in each season of the show where they go to the library and they read each other. And so reading is fundamental sort of for our gay community. And a lot of times that can be in fun and jest, but there's a nastiness that can be in part of the humiliation also, I think sometimes. And when we feel that humiliation, it can lead to mental health problems. It can lead to depression. It can lead to anxiety, to feel humiliated, to feel less than. In reading about humility more, they say that the lowest cuts of meat, this is considered a long time ago, were actually called umbles. And that's where the term humble pie came from. That when you had humble pie, you were eating the lowest cuts of meat, and that means you came from a lowly station. So there's something about humility that's been used almost as a derogatory term. And it's also part of our culture and part of who we are in that sense. But part of what I want to do is to sort of bring that back and bring back the virtue of humility. Something that can be nurtured and appreciated, something that can lead to more connection with other people, and something that can lead to contentment. Because I think ultimately what drove me to the Dharma and what I really appreciate the Dharma, and I think probably what drove a lot of us here is we want some sense of connection. We want some sense of freedom from suffering, of some level of contentment where we feel that things are okay the way they are. And I think humility can really help lead us to all of that. Now, the lack of humility is known as pride. And pride is something that I think is also worth exploring. Pride has been considered the number one of the 7 deadly sins. It's a selfishness. It's putting one's own desires and urges above those of others, one's own welfare above that of others. It's believing one is superior and more important than other people. One thing I think that's really happened in this last year of COVID for a variety of reasons, it's that, and it even happened before COVID, is we've really been looking at ourselves more in terms of our racism, our sexism, our classism. I think if we really examine our own sense of pride, and it can even be unconscious sometimes, we can get a deeper insight into our internal racism, it can be a sense of pride of thinking that we're better than others. And our whiteness is better, or our maleness is better, or our class is better, that I came from an educated segment of society, whatever it is, that this sense of pride can separate us and cause unhappiness, cause lack of contentment. And I certainly know that pride has played an important part in my life. I was a very insecure gay kid. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. When I was a kid, I wasn't a very happy kid, and I didn't feel like I fit in. I felt different. I felt like I was a sissy. I had a list that I had to go to speech therapy for, and I was very ashamed about that. I remember in first and second grade, I had to leave class early sometimes because I had to go to a speech therapist, and it was like, oh my God, something's wrong with me. I had a very low self-esteem. But for some reason, I was bold enough and brash enough that I pushed on, I carried on, and I ended up in New York, and I ended up working as an editor for TV commercials, and I became very successful with this. And I developed a strong sense of pride. And I was really proud about this. And I felt like I was somebody. I felt like I fit in, like I belonged, and it felt good. But with that pride, sometimes came a sense of cockiness, thinking that I was better than other people, a sense of competitiveness. If somebody else was getting to be as good as I was a little bit cautious and a little pushed back a little bit. And some fear would arise. Oh my God, what if they now become the number one and I'm no longer that? So with that pride, which was hard earned and made me feel somewhat connected in some ways, also came all these other things that I had to guard and protect and build up, and led to an attitude too often where I was treating people as less than. And that's not where I want to be, but that's just sort of what happened. And then I come to San Francisco, and thanks to my friend David Wiseman, who's here, I get involved in documentaries, and I become a filmmaker instead of a commercial editor. And another sense of pride came up for me. That there's a certain, in our culture, filmmakers are given a certain high place, I feel sometimes. When you tell people, oh my God, I make documentaries, they're like, oh, that's really cool. And I think that's a little off balance sometimes, but I accepted that, and I enjoyed that a lot of times too. It felt good to be respected and to be looked up to and things like that. But again, there's a separation that's going on. And along with that, around that same time, in came Buddhism and the Dharma, which really sort of helped me balance it much more than I did earlier in my career. Because I remember as soon as I started to become successful as a filmmaker, I also realized that as soon as you're successful, this year, the next year, you become last year's filmmaker, or, a has-been filmmaker or something like that. And that's a slippery slope to ride. You have to keep building up this sense of who you are. I don't want to say that pride is always bad. I think there's a lot of good aspects to pride. It can be wonderful to take delight in our accomplishments, in our deeds, in our actions, and our creativity. There's a really good sense of doing something that can be uplifting, to putting something out into the world. I mean, I really appreciate what Cass said about these are stories that will be told and that can help, future generations of queers feel part of their history, learn about their history. I mean, there's a nice aspect to the pride in that. We actually, our gay community, we associate it with pride. It's gay pride. It's what we use to uplift us, to bring us together, to join us. But I think the pride has to be careful how we deal with it. And I think one aspect to look at is how this pride feels in our body. Not only how does it feel in our body, but what are the consequences of our own pride? And oftentimes when I'm feeling this pride in a big way, there's a sense of puffiness. There's a sense of enlargement. There's a sense of grandiosity of some sort that I think needs to be cautious. And again, because this can separate us from other people. I think, like I was talking about earlier in my childhood, there's with humility, there's the other side of it, which is low self-esteem. I think some of us, and I think all of us can fluctuate between it. I know I certainly can. There are times when I feel very over prideful, but there's also times when I feel very low self-esteem, like I'm less than other people. And I think this is also a sort of a dangerous place to be, and also something to examine and to sort of see how can we deal with this. There was a moment with in the Coen film 2, where a childhood friend is talking about Leonard. And this is a woman, Nancy Bacall, an actress who grew up with Leonard. She knew him since their teenage years. And she went through all kinds of spiritual awakenings with Leonard. Leonard got very deeply involved in Judaism and also got very deeply involved with Zen Buddhism and lived for 5 years in a monastery. So he was a spiritual seeker from childhood on. But she tells a story about one time. She said, I remember once I was musing with Leonard on purgatory, and I was very fearful of it. And Leonard said, "This is purgatory." And he meant the whole thing, what we're living. And at the same time, he would say, "What an amazing experiment this is. What an amazing experiment this is." That's one of my favorite lines in the movie in a lot of ways. And I don't know if I completely agree that we're living in purgatory, but what I really respond to is that being human is not easy. Being human is tough. We go through loneliness. We go through grief. We go through poverty. We go through racism. We go through homophobia. It's not easy. We're given a body, we become attached to it, and then it ages, and then it falls away, and then it gets decrepit. This is very, very challenging. At least I find it is for me. So in that sense, being human can be challenging, can be hell. There is a purgatory aspect to it. But at the same time, what an amazing experiment this is. What an amazing, I think the last time I talked to you last year, also on Zoom, I just talked about the universe within us and the unfathomable universe around us. And the billions of years that have come and led us to this moment right now that will fall away and then it'll go on. And we get to be a part of that. We get to be right here in the middle of it right now. What an amazing experiment this is. And it's humbling. But I think it can also help us with our low self-esteem sometime. To put us into this, in the middle of this amazing experiment. To help with our grief and our loneliness. To be humble is not to think less of oneself, but to think of oneself less. I love that line. To be humble is not to think less of oneself, but to think of oneself less. And when I was thinking about this, it's sort of, we can turn no self-esteem into no self-esteem. So the fact that it's not like we don't have any self-esteem, but the fact that we really don't have a self, we can esteem in that. And so if we can work with our lack of self-esteem in that way, it could be an interesting thing to be empty of ego. The whole sense of there are a number of fundamental aspects to Buddhism that I love and that I have found challenging at times. And one of them is no self. I remember when I first heard a talk on no self, it was Joseph Goldstein. I was on retreat, and it really pissed me off. It was like, how can you tell me there's no self? Because I feel it. I am it. It's like, you can't tell me there's no self. But over time, I've come to appreciate that while I have my personality and my patterns, my uniqueness, my own sense of, I could even say specialness, which we all have, there's nothing permanent about that. And what I have now is not what I had a week ago, and it's not going to be, and it's going to be gone in a while. There's nothing permanent about that. And that sense of no self, I've become more and more aligned with. And there's also a whole sense of freedom that comes with that I don't have to build up this sense of self, that I don't have to protect it, that I don't have to worry that it's going to be offended or humiliated, that I am just part of this fabric. And as such, I can appreciate it as such. I certainly know that we've been living through a very humbling time, because I think a lot of what I have viewed as sense of self, I've certainly viewed around body, personality, work, how I relate socially with people, how I interact in the community, in my neighborhood. And in the past year plus, that's all changed. All of that's changed. And that's been humbling in a way. It's been very rich in terms of having the opportunity to see life without all of those things which I use to help identify self. But it's also been, I've also gone into depression over it too. It's like, okay, who am I if I'm not somebody that goes to work and works directly with other people instead of over Zoom, or if I'm not somebody that, meets friends in a bar, or goes to a GBF meeting, or goes to a GBF retreat and sits with everybody and interacts and hugs and do all of that kind of stuff. Sort of who is left with that? Who is the sense of Bill in all of that, or of any of us? And at the same time, for me, it's been extra humbling in the fact that I'm starting to retire, and I can't say I've retired, but I'm starting that process. I'm turning down work. I'm starting to take Social Security. I'm starting to take money out of my IRA, and it's like, okay, I don't have to work anymore. But if I don't work, then who am I? It's because this is how I sort of know myself. And as I mentioned earlier, this is sort of how I first developed my sense of pride, my sense of how I fit in. And along with that, the aging process, I find I'm in my late 60s now. I just turned 68. The aging process, I find, accelerates as we get older. And a lot of my identity was really around my sense of body, and certainly my sense of sexuality. And these days, my sexual desire isn't as strong as it used to be. And I also get the sense that my sexual desirability from others isn't what it used to be, And so if that was part of my sense of identity, that's all falling away. That's all, coming down. So it's challenging and it's humbling. So with this humility, it's nice to look at who is there. Who am I? Just part of this big, wonderful experiment. There's action we can take with engaging with humility. One thing that can be really helpful, and it has to do with sort of aligning with not having too strong of a sense of self, is really bringing in this whole fact that we really don't know, that we really don't have the answers. I know my friend David and I have been talking about this recently, and he said that's what he tells people all the time now. He says, I don't know. And I think that's a great actualization of humility, because we really don't know. And it's also one of the foundations of the Dharma in a lot of ways too. We don't know. The Suzuki Roshi from the Zen Center would say, in a full mind, there's no room for anything to come in, for anything to grow, for anything to arise. But in an empty mind, there's infinite possibilities. So if we can align with that more, not knowing, not holding on so tightly to our beliefs, to our opinions, I think this, this is what I believe. Like the people on the street corner that hold up signs, make America great again. This is what I believe. I don't know. I don't know. It's a great practice, and it's a great practice of humility. Another practice that I like a lot and that I've used on and off in my life to greater degrees is the practice of bowing. And the practice of bowing is another action of humility. We drop the ego, we drop the sense of self that we hold on to, and we lower our head. I was reading something about bowing, and they said one thing that it aligns the head with the heart more. So it's like we're bringing our head back down to our heart. Even if you bow down low enough, your head goes below your heart. So you're really sort of elevating your heart, and which to me, the heart is more, the ego's up here. The sense of self's up here. I don't think it's up here. The sense of connection and togetherness and all that's beautiful, I believe, comes more out of here. Coming back to the Dalai Lama again, there's a story I read many years ago when he was staying at the St. Francis here in San Francisco, and he was leaving, and he had everybody that served him come outside. The busboys, the maids, the waiters, the bellhop, everybody came outside, and he bowed to each one of them. What an act of humility, and what a beautiful act of acknowledgement in a lot of ways too. He is not better than them, but he is thanking them for their service. I read, and again, and searching through topics on humility, I came across this Forbes article that was talking about the traits of being a humble person. And again, this is sort of humility in action. And if there's anything I'm hoping I'm sharing today, is that the there will be encouragement to put humility into action, because I think that it makes the world a more graceful place to live in. But the traits of a humble person, one is that they maintain relationships, which sort of makes sense because you aren't putting yourself above or below. You're in relationship. They put others first. I think we all know the experience of being someplace where somebody just wants to talk about themselves, and where somebody says, "How are you doing? What are you up to? Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be with?" What a beautiful thing to put others first. Humble people listen. Again, it's sort of what environment do you want to be in? Somebody that really listens to you, or somebody that just wants to talk to you all the time and tell you about themselves? And how is it that we are interacting in that way? Are we listening, or is it just about me again? Humble people are curious. Curiosity is such a gift. I often hear people saying, "Oh, I got so bored." I think if you're truly curious, you're never bored. There's always something to pay attention to. We just sat for 30 minutes. Nothing going on. We didn't go anyplace, but there was a million things going on. I can pretty much guarantee it. Body sensations, thoughts, emotions, pain, vibrations, all of that stuff. Be curious about that. The humility that accompanies being curious. Humble people accept feedback. Humble people assume responsibility. And lastly, humble people ask for help. So maybe just consider some of these traits. When you go out today, just keep them in the back of your mind, or maybe even in the front of your mind. Can I put others first? Am I curious? Am I accepting feedback? Am I listening? To put some of this humility into action. In September, I'm going back to my 50th high school reunion. And I'm excited about it in a lot of ways. I maintain relationships with a number of people from high school, but also I'm aware of how my pride and my sense of self and ego and my sense of my desire for affirmation and recognition plays into it. Because I know I'm going back with some degree of, look at me. I moved to San Francisco. I lived in New York. I've made these movies. There's an overblown sense of pride that I realize I am carrying back to me, that I will be carrying back with that. And in prepping this talk on humility, that's come up for me a number of times about how my own ego and my own sense of self gets overinflated and separates me. And what I'm hoping for is that recognition and that examination, that curiosity with that, will help me not only go back with less of that attitude, but also make me more open to hearing what everybody else is up to seeing them for who they are now, for remembering what we shared and to see what we can share now, for honoring them and what they've gone through in their own humbling life. And I'm hoping I can carry a lot of that with me, while occasionally going, me, So we'll see how that goes. And maybe, come October, I can come to GBF and tell you some if I was successful or not. So I'm going to close up here and open this up for questions, I think, soon. But in closing, I just want to say one of my favorite parts of the Dharma is that the Buddha always asks us to believe in what we know to be true and not in what he is telling us to be true. That this is truly about direct experience. And I mention that now because I'm hoping that some of you can take some of what I've said here and put it into experience and utilize it to a way where you can play with it and see what the consequences are if you go at something with a more humble attitude or if you go with something with more of a sense of self, and to also start to realize where that difference lies, and not to be ashamed of healthy pride, but to be careful of the orange freak kind of pride that we lived through for those last 4 years. And to sort of notice the difference and notice the consequences of when we approach something humbly. Because what I found, there's a great sense of freedom. There's the lack of the comparing mind falls away. The having to protect something falls away. I don't know, just play with it and see what the consequences of it for yourself, because I have actually found it to be very freeing to try to approach things with as much humbleness as I can, and to put myself in the middle of it and not above it and not below it. So, thank you, everybody. Again, it's been a pleasure. And again, I hope this has been some service. And let's open it up for questions.
So I have a question. This is Tom Bruein. Hey.
Hey, Tom.
Wonderful talk, as always. I always enjoy your talks because they're structured, but, you just go with it. So I really like that. One of the things you said was, it sort of instilled this curiosity in me about our language and why humility is about humiliation, whereas pride is, something and I was curious enough that I looked up and found, I thought, I wonder if it's arrogance instead, like maybe these 7 deadly sins or whatever, when they were translated from Greek or whatever, if maybe it was more arrogance. And, I looked at this article that said pride is taking responsibility in, beneficial actions or behaviors or accomplishments, whereas arrogance is taking pride in oneself, especially versus others, so elevating the self and all that. And, there was something you said about, humiliation, like with the drag race and things like that. And it's interesting because I think we, in trying to humiliate somebody, there might be this intent to make them more humble. But I'm wondering if it has the opposite effect. Like, we become so resistant to being humiliated that we don't even want to become humble ourselves. And I was wondering if, what your thoughts are on that. Like, it's the more humiliation that goes on in the world, the less humble as a people we become.
Right. Boy, I don't know. There's a lot of musings that could go on with that. And I really appreciate, Tom, you bringing in arrogance as sort of another way to look at pride, because there are a lot of good aspects to pride, but I don't know how many good aspects there are to arrogance. It doesn't seem like a whole lot. And boy, if anything can separate us and disconnect us, it's arrogance in a lot of ways. And that's very much, I think, what we've been experiencing under the last president. But I don't know. I think we use humiliation sometimes to make ourselves feel better. and as almost as a weapon, I think sometimes. And so it's a way to sort of help and protect ourselves.
Our egos.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's something to examine, but it is funny how we have sort of redefined humility in ways that are not helpful. And I think that can help lead to a sense of arrogance,
Yeah. It's interesting. You're either humble or you're arrogant. Like there's no in between. Thank you.
Well, I think that's where positive pride comes in, like gay pride or, whatever. I think I was struck by Bill's comment about humility. The Latin word for humility is humilitas, which means low. It means literally low. And I think historically the idea was that in cultures, the poor, for example, the outcasts were low, not just figuratively, but physically low compared to the others. But I think the insights of religious teachers, including the Buddha, including Jesus, including scholars within Judaism and Islam, tried to reconfigure that. I'm struck by there was a film, a documentary about gay Jews, or maybe it was Orthodox Jews, called Davening Before God. And part of the description was the idea of praying had to do with bodily language and bowing. And I'm struck by within Christianity, within Catholicism, there is that bodily image also within Islam. In Islam, on Friday prayer, all Muslims bow and touch their head to the ground in a respectful way. And I think respect is an important aspect of good pride, that one is respectful of one's place as well as accepting of oneself. And I think one of the things, and I just want to say one more thing, that I am reflecting on right now and kind of dealing with is I think it's really okay for us to be gay men. And in this era of where there's a lot of veiled and not so veiled antipathy, maybe understandable towards maleness or gayness or whiteness, I think one has to be I want to say careful, critical in a good sense, but not dismissive. And anyway, this whole idea of humility, I think, plays into that. And I want to thank you for bringing it up because it's really intrinsic, I think, to one's mental health in this time.
Yeah. And I appreciate you talking about the pride of being, I think pretty much everybody I see here, we're white gay men. So
with an emphasis on white and male.
We aren't above anybody, but we aren't below anybody. Look
what we did with AIDS. And I think as I was involved very early in the AIDS epidemic, and I'm very interested in revisiting that. But I think that right now it's very understandable to feel vulnerable in that regard. And I think one needs to take careful assessment. I'm not going to apologize for being male or white. I mean, I understand the historical context and all. But I think that's beside the point. What I really like about what you said is the kind of introspection, that the healthy introspection that needs to come with understanding our place in the world, who we are, our own self, as opposed to other selves.
Right. Thank you.
I'm afraid we're at time right now. So, as I said, we will keep the room open for another half hour if anybody is interested in, anybody wants to continue the discussion. But right now, does anybody have any announcements?
Yeah, I'll just speak.
Okay.
Yeah, GBF is having our annual retreat at the Land of Medicine Buddha. It's in SoCal, just south and north of Santa Cruz, November 12th through 14th. And there'll be more details coming, but if you want to save the date, it's November 12th through 14th.
Okay, next week we'll have a small group discussion. I'd like to remind people that Dana is the Pali word for generosity, and your donation helps the Sangha pay for Dana through our Dharma speakers, rent at the meditation center, our online presence, and for our newsletter, which we print and mail out 4 times a year, mostly to people who are incarcerated. You can make a contribution of Dharma through our website, gaybuddhist.org, or you can send a check to our post office box. Does anybody have any further announcements before our dedication of merit?
So one last thing. We didn't do the, I don't remember the part where we mentioned names of people who passed.
Oh, I don't recall that ever being a part of our regular.
Well, maybe it was David.
Yeah, David does it. Yeah.
Okay.
But you're right. It would be a good thing to incorporate on a regular basis.
Well, just
are you thinking?
We had a really big week, I think. Like we lost Fred Townsend and Fatima Rood.
Right.
So I was kind of looking forward to that, but I just did. So that's it.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Clearly Fatima's passing did affected a lot of people really profoundly.
Mm-hmm. It's true. She was a sister also, right?
She was Sister Hateful Sal. I presume it was as opposed to Holy Cow.
Right. Gotcha.
Okay, so Bill, I'll turn it to you again for the dedication of merit.
Yes. Right before I do that, I just want to also say that the Donna from GBF also has in the past and hopefully will again in the future, go to providing meals at Loughrigg Street Youth Center. And because I know I've worked with many of you there before on that. I know that Donna also helps pay for that. So, and I hope that program comes back again soon and that I can see some of you there with that. So, May whatever merit that we've gathered today from our good intentions, from our goodwill, from our being in community, sitting together, may whatever merit that we've gathered from this, may we share it freely. May we share it with those that we live with. May we share it with those in our neighborhood, in our community. May we share it with all of the queer people around the world who are suffering oppression. May we gladly and freely give this merit of our good intentions and our actions. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings know contentment and happiness. May all beings be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you,
so much,
Cass.
Bill. Thank you for a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Bill. Cass.
I'll stay around for a few minutes too if anybody has any other questions or anything. I'm also very happy just to listen. It's more fun than talking.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And we meet again on Wednesday night. We do a sitting and an open discussion, and otherwise next Sunday.
Thanks again, Bill.
Really. Bill, I don't recall in what setting it was, but you talked about when you guys were nominated for an Oscar and you got to be in L.A. For the Academy Awards, and you saw Jack Nicholson walk into some room as if he owned it.
He did.
And then Daniel Day-Lewis just slipped in, not drawing any attention to himself. I think that's a very stark and helpful contrast to what you're talking about.
That wasn't the Academy Awards. That was actually it was the Los Angeles Film Critics Award.
Okay.
And but they had all the nominees over for dinner, and so it was a room full of all kinds of celebrities, and it was really interesting to see because I'm glad you brought that up, mainly because Daniel Day-Lewis is one of the most humble people around, and it was beautiful to witness that. So it was again humbleness in action, and in contrast to arrogance and haughtiness. So. Yeah.
Well, I also think that modesty is an underused word in this topic.
Absolutely. Yes.
In the I Ching, the hexagram on modesty is the one with no negative changing lines. The value was so esteemed in the ancient Chinese culture to be the middle path, not too high, not too low, and to realize our utter dependence on the universe for our experience.
Right.
Anyway, once again, wonderful to see you and wonderful talk.
Jim, always good to see you. And I'm glad you brought the middle path back in too, because this is the middle path. And the humbleness is the middle path. Yeah.
I'm very interested in words, and you made me realize something I hadn't thought about before. It's interesting when you humiliate someone, you've really done an unkind act. To be humiliated is not a good thing, but to feel humble, to be humble is a good thing. And they're both related to the same word. It's astounding to me, and I wish I had the resources and energy to go find out how those two distinctions, opposite distinctions from the same word, came about. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I was surprised because in my own mind, I think of humility and modesty as being more akin to each other. And yet when Bill defined humility as being about low self-esteem, I hadn't thought of that before. I mean, I usually hear humility used in a positive way towards someone, more like modesty. And so the relationship between that notion of humility, which is being low and having low self-esteem, and humiliating another in a way makes sense. Also something that I'd never thought of before is the relationship between humility and humiliation. Because again, my sense of when I hear someone described as being humble, I usually hear it as being a compliment, not as being, that person has low self-esteem. So it was great, Bill. I mean, it was a whole different way of thinking about what is humility and what is the root of the word, which does alter the way we, engage with it and embody it. It was really interesting.
We seem to really like humility in other people.
Cass.
Well,
very good.
That brings a question up for me. Bill, are you responsible for the documentary We Were Here?
I'm partially responsible. David down in the corner there he directed and produced it. I co-directed and edited it. Yeah.
Were you featured in Out There magazine years ago with Penny Arcade on the cover? As featured by Brendan Schuchart? Does that ring a bell?
Probably.
Yeah. Probably.
There was a lot of press, and I know I got interviewed by Brendan at some point.
Yeah. Well, I was not humble, but I was in the same article. So I just recently read it again and saw your face, and then you just said David Wiseman, and the last name is distinctive. So you were both photographed by Jody Jock, I think.
Huh. Jason, why were you in it?
Because of my nightlife contributions. I did a lot of theater in nightclub. Huh. Yeah. So
what kind of theater?
What kind of theater? Avant-garde, like audio collages. So it was basically like, you remember Lip Synca? Are you familiar with that drag queen?
Sure.
Who used to just recite different audio clips and like enter the phone, and like you'd hear the ring. She'd like put her hand up. I that made an impact on me. So I made feature-length musicals that were fully lip-synced by top drag queens in the city.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it's, I kept the stud going for a while. Yeah.
Hey, Bill, I had a question for you. Oh, excuse me. Bill, hey, nice to see you. This is Mark.
Nice seeing you.
I'm just curious, did I sometimes pile the word legacy. I've heard that word a lot, not so much recently, but I don't know if, do you think much about your legacy or the word legacy itself? I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, I don't a lot. I find I'm naturally aligning myself more and more with the fact that it goes back to what Leonard said. This is a marvelous experiment. And, that, it goes back to what the Native Americans said about, 7 generations, that our actions can last 7 generations. So there's a legacy of that, but then they eventually dissipate. Eventually the earth is going to be gone. The sun's going to burn out. It's like, it's all going to be gone. So what's legacy? I don't know. But the 7 generation stuff I think about, that my actions, that all of our actions reverberate and that are important and they continue to reverberate for a long time. So 7 generation legacy, I believe in, I think, but much beyond that, I don't know. Yeah. Well, why do you ask?
Well, I just, it's not something I think about too much, but over the last few years, I just hear that word, or I'm noticing that word coming up. I guess partly just I'm reflecting on my life. I mean, I'm an older person, and what have I done? What have I accomplished?
Right.
Does it matter? Who cares? I don't know. All those kinds of questions.
Good questions. These are very good, Mark.
So, yeah. And I mean, part of me is when I think about it, I'm sort of, I'm kind of embarrassed to be thinking about it. I mean, this is what one shouldn't be thinking about,
No. And those are great questions. Yeah. And what you do does matter. Yeah. Things reverberate. You go out and you're nice to somebody, that echoes. You go out and you're an asshole to somebody, that echoes, So.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you.
Bill, wow. I mean, Trump is like the Aguli Mala of our day. To just even think about that guy.
Yeah.
I really like what you said about, hallelujah and this grace and keeping our tools sharp. And, you practice and you sort of go, why am I practicing? And then these sort of truth arises with practice. And, you don't try to be wise. There's sort of a wisdom in our maturity with both practice and our lives. I mean, thinking of you, lisping and all that horrible feeling, I think we all can identify many aspects of that. And still having sort of that pride moving forward and just, the gumption to keep moving forward. Obviously, you've offered great creativity and great art to our community and to the world. You brought up that idea also of not knowing, that sort of Zen koan comes up of not knowing is most intimate, sort of those questions we carry. And it's just, we're never going to be answer those in some ways, but they keep us sort of moving forward. I really like that. It's really strong. And just one other thing I was going to say is evolutionary biologists and or psychologists that study our the way we move in the world. I find that you spoke about this sense of pride, this sort of a filling or a puffiness in the chest that starts to occur. And it's very true. You can take a what humans do when they're in shame, they put their neck down like this. It's a primate behavior. So you're lowering yourself so someone can actually go at your neck and kill you, right? Ultimately, it's some beast or something. And they thought it was sort of culturally picked up, but they studied blind folks and they do it when they're feeling shame. And it's also this and the boasting thing, this sense of pride, that somatic experience of what we all feel that. And we know when it's a boasting kind of thing. You know, you think of birds and their feathers marching around. It's all about spreading our evolutionary. So it's a really good flag to say, is it going too far, or am I right now? Is it pride? Am I just standing upright? Am I upright and moving with the world? And sort of a piece of bamboo, you know, sort of moving back and forth, but it's not really to be resilient, but there's a certain pride. And when you think of gay pride and all of us and the history of our group coming forward, we should really honor it. It's our creativity. It's a deep wisdom. And we are humble. I just want to offer that. Thanks so much. It was a great talk.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chris. And I really like the fact that you bring up practice again, too, because it is practice. And we have to practice. And that's sort of why I opened with the Buddha said, you know, what you rest in your mind with creates your world in a lot of ways. And to me, that's why we practice, you know. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
I was going to mention, I think pretty much all of us here, when we came out, it was during the time when homosexuality was considered a mental illness. You know, we all lived through that, or most of us. There's a few younger folks here, but I came out in 72, and it wasn't until 73 that the Psychiatric Association said it wasn't a mental illness.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. That was such a beautiful documentary last year. Was it at Frameline last year that they had that documentary, Cured? Was it? Oh, it was gorgeous. It was just a wonderful documentary. Yeah. Oh, do see it. It was wonderful. It's all about the psych group having to get us taken out of the illness category and put over into the fight they had to occur. It started happening in the 50s, actually. Anyway.
Yeah. Chris, thank you. Could you put the reference in the chat if you happen to know it? Was it Cured?
Yeah, it's called Cured. It was in Frameline last year. If you look up there,
okay.
And actually, Frameline's going online again. You can buy a ticket. You buy a pass. You get to just watch it for the whole week.
Thanks.
It'll be online for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to offer a reflection.
Sure.
I'm Jason. Well, first off, I just want to say that I think it's kind of disingenuous on some level that that I hear a lot of people kind of downing the arrogant guy, because I know that probably a lot of us have been attracted to the arrogant guy, that there also is a sexiness to someone who struts. And so I think that it's disingenuous to say that we don't find that attractive, because in certain moments there is something to be drawn towards that.
Some people, but everybody.
I think that most people have had their moments of being attracted to a proud person, someone who has that bravado.
Maybe.
I'm saying most people. It might not be you, Mike, and that's cool. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to offer a path idea about the idea of the bow, because in my body awareness practice that I do with clients, I do a bow. I went to Naropa University and we did a bow before every class and at the end of every class. And I never found the bow to be a sense of humility. I always found the bow to be a moment of being present to others. So not about it being about letting go down my pride or, being less than. It was a nice moment to both take in the moment and then to take in the other, and then to acknowledge what we're coming into to do, and then also to close out what we have done together. So I wanted to acknowledge that idea of the bow.
Yes.
And I just think it's interesting about what you said about going to your high school reunion and, this sense of like who you are and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like within my work with my clients, I'm bringing who I am, right? And I'm meeting them, right? And I'm just all going to be offering them some approaches, right? And some pathways, right? And we're going to play within that dynamic, right?
Right.
And so I think it's interesting, the idea of curiosity around, well, allowing people to be curious about you. You know, you have a very different life and they have a different life, right? So within that idea of like, rather than it being about being proud or being humble, what is it about just being curious about each other as different lived experiences?
Right. No, Jason, I appreciate that. But what I was hoping I was getting across was the balance. And I think you're talking about the balance because, I notice with myself, sometimes my pride gets such that it's out of balance and it's about me, and not about being present in the moment with both. And I'm certainly not ashamed of what I bring back, but I don't want to have that override the others. And I also don't want to put myself above. And that's what I find I have a tendency to do sometimes. And that's what I really want to be careful about. So, and also your other comment about being attracted to arrogance, I can understand that. I think in many ways, but also just in terms of a sexiness, for somebody to take charge can be incredibly sexy. And again, I hope I wasn't talking in black and whites, and that's why I try to talk about the good aspects of pride a bit and things too. But I also find that unmitigated arrogance is incredibly harmful in many ways.
Yeah, I'm not saying let's stay with the arrogant guy, right? Because they are narcissists largely, you know. Yeah. They're not. You know, there's a lot of wounding within that. But just at the same time, that if you see that in a space, there can be an attraction towards that energy.
Yeah.
Carl Menninger said that the secret desire in American adults is revenge on people they went to high school with for making them feel inadequate.
Yeah.
And it completely plays out at high school reunions. But the fever only lasts like through the 20th reunion. And then after that, everyone has been brought to their knees and they're just glad to see each other. So it's a love fest more than a ego strut.
Yeah.
You'll have a great time.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
But there's also a way I think of your accomplishments elevating other people. It's like, look at what our group did. You know, I mean, I think people can feel when you're projecting a connection as opposed to a separation to the group.
Right. That's sort of the great guideline of all of this. Is it connecting or is it separating? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that documentary is called Cured that I told you about. It's really excellent if you get a chance to see it. It was on Actors Frameline. I still have the
Thank you all. Thanks, Bill. Great to see you.
Thank you all. I got to sign off too, but I really appreciate this.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Sure.
Thanks,
Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.